Control was not just a habit for him, it was a necessity. As a young Korean Mafia boss, he had learned early that survival depended on precision, discipline, and dominance. Every move he made was deliberate, every decision calculated to eliminate risk. His life ran on structure. Alliances carefully chosen, enemies closely watched, emotions locked away where they could do no damage. In a world shaped by betrayal and power struggles, control was the only shield he trusted. He believed chaos was the enemy of authority. Anything unpredictable had to be removed or subdued. That belief shaped the man he became: respected, feared, and isolated. People followed his orders without question, not because they loved him, but because they understood the consequences of defiance. He preferred it that way. Loyalty born from fear felt safer than loyalty born from emotion. Despite his young age, he carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Weakness was not an option, and sentimentality was a luxury he could not afford. He kept his personal life as tightly managed as his criminal one, allowing no one close enough to see hesitation or doubt. Even moments of solitude were controlled, chosen carefully to ensure his guard never fully dropped. Yet beneath that mastery lay exhaustion. Maintaining absolute control came at a cost: constant vigilance, endless pressure, and a loneliness he refused to acknowledge. He told himself that this was the price of power, that a man like him could not afford softness or attachment. Control had given him everything he owned, everything he was. And so he tightened his grip on his world, confident that nothing could escape his command. Nothing, he believed, could disturb the order he had built so carefully. What he did not yet know was that control could manage fear, money, and power, but it could not command the heart. She had learned early in life that independence was not a choice but a necessity. As a young black woman, her world had never been gentle enough to allow dependence on anyone else. Every step she took forward was earned through resilience, self-respect, and an unshakable sense of identity. She listened, observed, and moved with intention, but never allowed herself to be shaped by another person's will. Control did not impress her. Wealth did not intimidate her. Power, when displayed too loudly, only confirmed how fragile it truly was. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that did not seek attention yet commanded it naturally. Where others adjusted themselves to fit expectations, she remained rooted in who she was, refusing to bend even when circumstances demanded submission. Her strength was not loud or confrontational. It was steady. She had learned how to survive pressure without hardening her heart and how to protect her dignity without building walls. This balance made her rare. She did not challenge authority for the sake of rebellion, nor did she accept dominance for the sake of comfort. She chose her own boundaries and defended them calmly. People often underestimated her, mistaking composure for softness. They failed to see the depth of her resolve or the discipline behind her choices. She believed that freedom came from knowing when to walk away and when to stand still. No situation, no matter how powerful the figure involved, could force her to surrender her sense of self. This refusal to be controlled defined her path. It shaped how she entered new spaces, how she spoke, and how she judged character. She did not seek to change the world around her, but she would never allow it to change her. And in a life ruled by men who thrived on command and obedience, her presence was a quiet disruption, one that would soon test a man who believed he could control everything. Their meeting was never planned, and that was what made it powerful. In a life where everything moved according to design, chance had no place, yet fate slipped past his defenses without permission. A small, ordinary mistake brought her into his orbit, placing her in a space reserved for people who followed his rules and understood his authority. She did not belong there, and both of them sensed it instantly. For him, the disruption was immediate. He noticed her not because she stood out by force, but because she did not react the way others did. There was no fear in her posture, no attempt to impress or retreat. She acknowledged the situation calmly, as if she trusted herself enough to face whatever came next. That composure unsettled him more than defiance ever could. She, on the other hand, felt the weight of his presence without letting it dominate her. She understood she had crossed into something far bigger than herself, Yet she refused to panic or apologize for simply existing. Her awareness was sharp, her instincts alert, but her dignity remained intact. She chose calm over fear, clarity over chaos. That brief crossing created an invisible tension neither of them could ignore. It was not attraction at first, but recognition and understanding that something unexpected had just entered their lives. For him, it was the first time in years that an unplanned moment had not felt like a threat. For her, it was the first time power had stood before her without demanding submission. When their paths separated, neither walked away unchanged. He carried a disturbance he could not explain, a moment that refused to fit into his controlled world. She carried a quiet awareness that fate had brushed too close to danger and possibility. What began as an accident had already started to loosen the rules that governed them both. From the moment she crossed his path, she became an anomaly in his carefully ordered world. He was used to reading people quickly, anticipating reactions, measuring loyalty, identifying fear. Yet with her, every instinct he relied on failed him. She did not move according to expectation, nor did she respond in ways he could categorize or control. Her presence disrupted his certainty, and that unsettled him more than open opposition ever could. He found himself observing her in moments when he should not have cared. Her calm never wavered, even when surrounded by authority and pressure. She did not perform courage, nor did she seek validation. Instead, she acted from a place of inner balance that he could not manipulate or command. This unpredictability forced him into unfamiliar territory, where control no longer guaranteed understanding. What disturbed him most was that her unpredictability was not chaotic, it was grounded. She made choices based on principle rather than reaction, and that made her impossible to steer. Where others adapted themselves to his presence, she remained unchanged. He began to realize that her strength did not come from resisting power, but from not being impressed by it at all. For her, his attention was noticeable but not consuming. She understood power and danger, but she refused to let either define her behavior. She did not adjust her voice, her posture, or her values to accommodate him. That consistency became a quiet statement of independence, one that challenged his assumptions about control and dominance. As days passed, her presence lingered in his thoughts longer than it should have. Not because he desired possession, but because he could not predict her. In a life governed by strategy, unpredictability was dangerous, yet he felt drawn to it. She was the one variable he could not calculate, the one influence he could not neutralize. Without realizing it, he had begun to allow her existence to shape his awareness. His world no longer felt sealed and absolute. Something unplanned had entered, something human and uncontrollable. And for the first time, the lack of control did not feel like a weakness, it felt like the beginning of change. For the first time in his life, control began to slip, not in his empire, but within himself. He noticed it in the smallest changes. Hesitation where there had once been certainty, reflection where decisions used to be instant. Her presence had introduced something unfamiliar into his world, something no strategy could contain. It was not rebellion that challenged his authority, but awareness. He started questioning his own reactions, something he had never done before. Why did her opinion linger in his thoughts? Why did her safety matter more than logic demanded? These questions disturbed him because they revealed a truth he was unwilling to face. His authority was no longer absolute, at least not over his own emotions. Power had always meant command over others, but now he was confronting the limits of that definition. The discipline that once defined him began to blur at the edges. He still ruled with precision, still commanded respect, yet internally, the certainty he relied on had fractured. Decisions were no longer purely strategic. They carried weight and consequence beyond numbers and outcomes. The crack was subtle, invisible to everyone else, but to him it was undeniable. He tried to reinforce his control, reminding himself of the life he had built and the cost of weakness. Yet the more he resisted, the more aware he became of how deeply she had already affected him. Authority felt hollow when it required emotional suppression. Strength felt incomplete when it demanded isolation. These realizations unsettled him, forcing him to confront the idea that control, while powerful, was not sufficient on its own. Her influence was not forceful, nor was it intentional. She did nothing to challenge his dominance directly. She simply remained herself steady, independent, and unafraid. And in that quiet authenticity, she became the first presence capable of cracking his authority from within. That fracture did not weaken him publicly, but it changed him privately. It marked the beginning of an internal shift he could no longer reverse. For the first time, control was no longer his greatest strength, it was his greatest limitation. Attraction crept in quietly, disguised as curiosity, masked by discipline. He recognized it before he admitted it, and that recognition alone triggered resistance. Feelings, to him, were variables unreliable, dangerous, impossible to manage. And yet, despite every rule he had lived by, this pull toward her refused to obey command. It did not ask permission. It did not wait for logic. It simply existed. He approached the emotion the way he handled everything else, by trying to control it. He framed it as concern, then as responsibility, then as strategy. If he could define it, he believed he could dominate it. But the more he tried to contain the feeling, the more it revealed itself in subtle ways: attention lingering too long, thoughts returning to her without reason, a constant awareness of her presence even in her absence. What unsettled him was not desire alone, but how deeply it reached. This was not a passing impulse or physical distraction. It was connection. She challenged him without confrontation, drew him in without pursuit, and altered his internal balance without touching his external power. That made the attraction more dangerous than any threat he had faced, because it could not be eliminated without cost. She sensed the shift but did not exploit it. Her behavior remained unchanged: calm, composed, and self-directed. That consistency stripped him of excuses. He could not blame manipulation or intention. Whatever was happening between them was real, and it was forming beyond his authority. For the first time, his control over others felt insignificant compared to his inability to command his own heart. He told himself distance would restore order. He told himself discipline would suppress emotion. But attraction does not fade under pressure, it sharpens. The more he resisted, the more aware he became that this feeling had already altered him. It had introduced vulnerability into a life designed to exclude it. In trying to command attraction, he uncovered an impossible truth. Some forces are not meant to be controlled. They are meant to be faced. And the moment he understood that, he realized he was no longer fighting temptation alone. He was standing at the edge of surrender, unsure whether letting go would destroy him or finally make him whole. The moment his emotions shifted, the balance around him began to change. In his world, nothing went unnoticed for long. Loyalty was monitored, movements were tracked, and weakness, real or perceived, was always exploited. Desire had introduced a new variable into his life, and the shadows he had mastered for years responded immediately. Danger, patient and observant, followed quietly. Those who had once feared him began to sense hesitation where there had been none. Rivals noticed the subtle change in his priorities, the slight redirection of his attention. He had not announced his feelings, but power does not require confession to be detected. The mere existence of someone who mattered to him altered the way threats formed around his empire. For the first time, risk felt personal. Every potential confrontation carried consequences beyond territory or control. Her safety weighed heavily on every decision, sharpening his instincts yet complicating his actions. He understood the rules of his world well enough to know that affection created leverage, and leverage invited danger. What unsettled him most was not the presence of threats but the realization that they could reach her. She became aware of the shift in atmosphere even without understanding its source. The world around him grew tense, more alert, more guarded. Yet she did not retreat. Rather than shrinking under the pressure, she remained composed, refusing to let fear dictate her presence. Her calm in the face of growing uncertainty challenged his instincts, forcing him to see her not as fragile, but formidable in her own right. He responded by tightening his control outwardly while struggling inwardly. Protection became instinctive, constant, unspoken. But even as he worked to shield her, he knew the truth he could not ignore. Danger did not follow her, it followed him. Loving her meant confronting the consequences of everything he had built before she entered his life. Desire had awakened more than emotion. it had awakened accountability. The threats closing in were not just enemies from the outside, but reminders of the life he could no longer separate from the one person who mattered. And as danger followed desire, he realized that love was no longer a risk he could avoid, it was a responsibility he would have to face head-on. When pressure intensified, he expected fear to surface in her, but it never did. Instead, her strength revealed itself in ways that challenged everything he believed about power. She did not rely on his protection as submission, nor did she shrink beneath the weight of his dangerous world. She faced uncertainty with clarity, choosing courage not because she was fearless, but because she refused to surrender her agency. Her response unsettled him. He had always associated strength with dominance, with the ability to control outcomes through force or authority. Yet she embodied a different kind of power, one rooted in self-respect and inner balance. She asked questions he had never asked himself, not through words but through example. She remained steady when situations demanded composure, and firm when boundaries needed to be held. Rather than demanding answers or reassurance, she trusted herself. That independence forced him to confront a reality he had avoided for years. Power that relies on fear is incomplete. Her presence did not diminish his authority, it exposed its limitations. He could command loyalty, obedience, and silence, but he could not manufacture trust, nor could he compel genuine connection. Her strength also carried compassion, something he had once dismissed as vulnerability. She did not judge his past, yet she did not excuse it either. This balance, understanding without compromise, challenged him deeply. For the first time, he was not admired for his dominance, but respected for his willingness to listen, to reflect, and to evolve. The shift was subtle but irreversible. He began to reassess the meaning of control, realizing it was not about suppressing others, but about mastering oneself. Her resilience did not oppose his power. It refined it. She showed him that true authority does not demand silence, it earns trust. Standing firm beside him without being overshadowed, she became a mirror reflecting the man he could be rather than the one he had been. Her strength did not threaten his power, it transformed it. And in that transformation, he discovered a new definition of leadership, one that balanced protection with respect and control with humanity. The realization did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slowly, through moments of silence and reflection he could no longer ignore. Control had shaped every version of his life, his rise, his power, his survival. Letting go of it felt like stepping into darkness without a weapon. Yet the longer he held on, the clearer it became that control was costing him something far greater than it protected. He began to understand that love could not exist inside rigid boundaries. Every attempt to regulate his feelings only tightened the conflict within him. He could suppress threats, outmaneuver enemies, and predict outcomes, but love resisted structure. It required exposure, honesty, and the acceptance of risk. Choosing her meant choosing uncertainty, and that terrified him more than any rival ever had. For the first time, he questioned what he was truly protecting. Power had given him authority, but it had also isolated him. Control had ensured survival, but it had drained meaning from it. With her, he felt present in a way he never had before, not invincible, but real. That presence forced him to confront a truth he could no longer deny. Domination without connection was emptiness disguised as strength. Letting go did not mean abandoning who he was. It meant redefining himself. He realized that choosing love was not surrender, it was courage. It demanded accountability for his past, intention for his future, and responsibility for how his choices affected others. He could no longer hide behind power alone. If he wanted her in his life, he had to be willing to change the life that surrounded him. She never asked him to choose her over everything else. That was what made the choice unavoidable. Her strength lay in her willingness to walk beside him, not behind him, and never beneath him. She did not demand he give up control, she showed him that releasing it was the only way forward. Choosing love, he accepted vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a commitment. He allowed himself to be seen, flawed and human, without guarantees. Control had once defined him, but now it loosened its grip. And in that release, he did not lose himself, discovered the man he had been protecting himself from becoming. Choosing love was the only move he could not calculate, the only risk he could not insure against. And yet, it was the first decision that felt truly his. In the end, acceptance came not as defeat, but as clarity. He stopped fighting the one force that had reshaped him from within. Love was never something he could command, schedule, or restrain, and once he understood that, peace followed. It was the only element in his life that had entered without permission and remained without apology. He looked back at the man he had been. Feared, respected, untouchable, yet profoundly alone. Control had given him dominance over his world, but it had never given him purpose. What changed him was not the loss of power, but the realization that power without connection was empty. Loving her did not weaken him, it anchored him. It gave direction to his strength and meaning to his authority. He no longer measured success by obedience or silence. Instead, he learned the value of trust, choice, and shared resolve. He adjusted his world not by force, but by intention. The empire he ruled still existed, but it no longer consumed him. For the first time, he was building something that could outlive fear. She remained steady beside him, not as someone he possessed, but as someone he chose every day. Her presence reminded him that real partnership does not come from control, but from mutual respect. She did not erase his past, yet she gave him a future that was not defined by it. Love became the one thing he never controlled and the one thing that finally controlled nothing about him. Freed him. In letting go of the need to dominate his heart, he gained something far greater than power. Balance, redemption, and the courage to live beyond the shadows he once ruled. What began as resistance ended in devotion. And in the end, the man who controlled every move accepted the truth that defined his transformation, that the strongest choice he ever made was surrendering to love.